So if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo. I know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. Seen that?
One of my favorite actors growing up was Robin Williams, and many of us were heartbroken by his passing. And it is still very painful to think about him because we know that he was struggling with his mental health and he was struggling with his physical health as well through his life, but especially towards the end of it. And his acting and humor brought joy and meaning to so many people's lives. I thought about the way his passing is being talked about in popular culture, though, and I felt that there was something a bit off about it. I don't know if you've seen those sort of photos being shared or passed around with quotes talking about how he knew sadness so well, and that is why he wanted to share and bring joy to other people's lives. I guess referring to having experienced depression. Thinking about that made me want to explore Robin Williams just a little bit further and to understand a bit more about his life and his art, which to me was his acting and his comedy. So much of pop culture represents artists in a way that I think is harmful and a bit trivializing this idea that artists must suffer to create art. But do we need to suffer to make good art? So this quote from Robin Williams' character in Good Will Hunting has always stood out to me in particular. You'll have bad times, but it will always wake you up to the good stuff you weren't paying attention to. So I'm just gonna take a listen to that.
Wonder if I'd be better off now. No, I'm not saying like better off. I didn't mean it like. It's all right. Important question. Because you'll have bad times, but they'll always wake you up to the good stuff you weren't paying attention to. And you don't regret. I mean, you what? Why? Because the pain I feel now? Oh, I got regrets, Will. I don't regret a single day I spent with her.
Okay, so to me, this quote represents the fact that suffering is a fact of life. Bad times will happen, and it is only natural. But the good stuff is what is important, and the good stuff is what we will miss if we don't pay attention. There is suffering, life is fragile, there's pain, but it's what makes life interesting too. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dee or Deanna Faye, and I'm an independent artist here in Canada. And I do things just a little bit different here. I make videos about creative insights, about the artists who create the art we love, and about the process behind this. So I've been meaning to make this video for a while, but I wasn't really sure at what angle I wanted to come at it with. And it's about how we can take care of ourselves as artists in a way that honors how difficult it can be to make art, but while still improving our creativity. So as I've mentioned in the intro, so much of pop culture represents artists in a way that I think is harmful personally. The biggest idea that I see is that artists should suffer to create art, but do we really need to suffer to create good art? And the story goes that many great artists have suffered to create their art, even artists that I've talked about on my channel, like Kurt Cobain, Elliott Smith, and many others. A really popular one in pop culture is Van Gogh. And even today's artists and YouTubers and other influencers, they often tell us a story of how they've suffered some kind of great lengths to get to the point where they are today. And a popular thread is the idea of overcoming suffering, and that is where we glean a lot of our inspiration. And it makes sense that this kind of story is inspiring. People want to know that they're not alone, and they want to receive and give empathy for other people's struggles as well, and they want to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I don't think there's anything wrong. I think it's really important to get inspiration from stories about suffering, and I don't think we should stop sharing stories about suffering and overcoming it. That's not the point of this video. But what about art that portrays joy or humor? Is this boring? Do artists feel that they need to have pain for people to relate to them? And maybe a part of us even feels that we should sabotage ourselves in order to be more relatable, more connected to, or to make our art about suffering, even though not all art has to be about suffering. So most inspiration seems to come not from the suffering itself, though. It comes from the finding of happiness despite the pain. So the finding of success and happiness despite suffering is where we seem to get our inspiration from. And I see that in the quote from Robin Williams that I played a bit earlier today. So we look to artists like Robin Williams, who had struggled with depression and addiction during his life, and we say, oh, he had such a happy and cheerful persona. Oh, I can't believe that he could have been going through depression. He must have wanted to make people smile and laugh, because this was his way of finding and sharing light in a dark world. And while this is a beautiful and inspiring idea, it's something that I've been thinking about quietly for the past few years, actually. And I wondered if we were simplifying a very complex experience of an individual person like Robin Williams. Upon investigating it further, I actually found out that Robin Williams had been sober for many years, according to some sources, and it was not even depression that likely caused his death, but rather he had a debilitating illness, a form of dementia with Lewy bodies that likely led to his cause of death. However, this was actually only discovered post-mortem, or after he died. And the story that was being told in pop culture, that depression had killed him, wasn't the full truth. And even though reports of this news were in public awareness, somehow collectively as a society, we kind of just forgot that this happened. And the idea and the story that depression killed Robin Williams is still really prevalent. The reason that I even thought about it in recent times is because someone had brought it up just while in casual conversation, and they told that same story again. The idea that he was this cheerful comedian and he was going through so much depression and how you could not tell. And while this is true, and since we don't actually know Robin Williams personally, this is kind of the story that we latch onto. It's not fully true that depression is what killed him. He was experiencing a lot of physical, mental health issues that were connected to having dementia with Lewy bodies, and that is what likely led to his death, not depression directly. And why is this even important? Like, why am I talking about this? So, the original story about how, he likely died because of his depression was people just grasping at straws related to his past struggles. What we knew about his past became the dominant narrative despite actually being false. And people were more interested in his struggles and this exaggerated story of a comedian who struggled with sadness. I think because it creates a nice headline, doesn't it? He struggled so much that he wanted to make others happy. And while I believe there is some power and some truth to this idea, and there is inspiration with this idea, I think it's also so black and white that it is almost comical, almost cartoonish to say. It doesn't take into account the fact that Robin Williams' skills and talents as an artist, or the fact that he had a genuine warm care for many living beings and people that I bet was present regardless of having experienced depression or not. And it's a narrative that turns artists into tortured creators. And this isn't only trivializing to people who experience mental illness and or substance abuse. It is also harmful because it places creators into a box, which may keep them from getting help or for reaching recovery. Because if we keep perpetuating this idea of the tortured artist, the creator in pain, the artist who is suffering, and that we should glean the art from his suffering or his or her suffering, their suffering, is not nice. It's actually kind of cruel if you think about it. And I look at a lot of poetry. I like to read poetry and different things like that. I was reading this quote where, and I don't have the actual quote anymore, but I was reading this quote where they were describing an artist suffering and how people wanted the artist to continue suffering because we were getting something out of it as the viewers, as people consuming that person's art. And I think this was kind of the case that we were perpetuating with Robin Williams. The idea that he was such a talented artist because he was suffering so much. It's not he was a talented artist. It's not he was a great comedian, a great actor. It's we focus on the suffering. We put that first. And while we can't speak for Robin personally, what we do know is that he did struggle with his mental health, but it had greatly improved or was likely in remission for the last few years of his life, although he experienced dementia with Lewy bodies, but was not diagnosed until post-mortem. He was one of the greatest comedians of all time, in my opinion, and I believe that his comedy was his art. And he was a very creative and inventive person who liked to share and express himself with others. I don't think that in improving his mental health and seeking recovery from his addiction, would he lose his ability or his natural innate talent for his art. There may be some statistics that show that comedians and even other artists do experience more mental health issues, and this is just a statistic, but simplifying the connection between the two, between higher rates of depression, mental illness, and being an artist, being a comedian, what have you, is a black and white way of thinking. It makes it seem cartoonish, as I said before. People are not characters. Comedians and artists, they're not simply tortured souls that must keep creating art in order to survive, or that they're creating art because they're suffering. It's, even if this was a fact, why would we not want to improve mental health services all around and to those who create the art that we so value? If we value their art, we should value the person behind it and not just for their suffering. It is heartbreaking to have to tell the story of yet another artist who suffered greatly for their art. And I think of all the artists who we look back on, and generally speaking, we seem to idolize their suffering. We glorify it. We make movies. We write books about it. We're kind of obsessed, and even to the point where we glaze over facts and reality for a story that glorifies the suffering of an artist over their life story, over their talent, over their skills, over who they are. We put the focus on the suffering. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't honor suffering at all. Definitely, suffering is a sacred thing. And it's important to have awareness, to bring awareness to the struggles people face and not diminish that aspect of their life. We don't have to diminish it yet. it should not be the main focus. But there is still stigma attached to mental illness, and I wonder how much of that is coming into play into this idea that artists suffer, and suffering always has and will be a fact of life. But I'd like to see a world where we not only see suffering with reverence and respect, but that we take it a step further and learn how to better the lives of artists and creators. Comedians like Robin Williams learn how to better take care of ourselves as artists and to prioritize our health more going forward. But I do not think art needs to be suffered for. Not that we should stop creating and sharing art that is created in suffering or is about it, but that this is not the only way. We live in a time now where mental health is being more understood, being more researched. There's more scientific evidence for treatment. And many treatments do work, and the idea that people cannot recover is so outdated. I'd like to see a new story emerge. And I'd like to see joy honored, and I'd like to see joy honored and not always on the sidelines of suffering. I'd like to see all aspects of life represented in art and the stories we tell about those who create it. And I'd like to tell stories about artists where we not only talk about their pain, but that we pay tribute to their talent, their true life stories, and who they were without only praising their ability to get past suffering. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing to my channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please take a moment to subscribe. It really helps me out. Leave a comment below or connect with me on Instagram. I'm also on Spotify and other streaming services. You can also purchase my music on Bandcamp. You can listen to my music here on YouTube as well. Keep creating and keep coming back for more content on art, music, and more. Take care. So when I first began my YouTube channel, I went into it without a particular goal other than to just share some of my music, share some of my thoughts, and to see what would happen. And as I was sharing my posts online for the first time in a more public sphere, I started to feel a connection with other artists and other creatives out there. So it felt incredible to actually feel like I was part of a community that I could share ideas with and converse with. And it kept inspiring me to continue making art and to understand why art was being made in the first place. And so it allowed me to connect with you guys out there and people I met at local places as well, other Canadian musicians, as well as artists around the globe, which has been super cool. You may not realize it, but I genuinely cherish the interactions that I share with you guys, whether small or large, and I just wanted to thank you guys for being a part of my little community as well. I think about how you continue to share your voices, to share your music, your art, whatever it is that you guys have been working on, because I know so many of you aren't doing music, but you're doing other creative projects, other work that's really important. And I'm just grateful for you all.